Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Red Power Hour. Again, we've been gone probably for about a month and a half, but we're really happy to be back. This is Melanie, one of the co hosts. Before we get started with introductions and getting into our topic for today, I just wanted to thank all of our patrons. I always call you Patreons. That's not your name, your patrons. Subscribe to our Patreon. Thank you so much to all of our subscribers. For folks who maybe haven't subscribed, you can subscribe for as little as $2 a month. All that money, again, goes into Red Media and the work that we do, paying Native creatives, right, to create content. And Red Media is trying to fill a gap, of course, with Indigenous media that is by and for Indigenous people and that isn't catered towards settler tastes and settler listeners. And so thank you so much for all of our supporters. And yes, please consider joining if you haven't. Also wanted to say one more thing. So Red Media is launching a fundraising campaign for Native American Heritage Month, which of course is November. So on November 1st, comrades Justine and Nick will be releasing probably about a 15-minute announcement about our newest GoFundMe campaign. Thank you so much to everyone who has already donated to it. We did a soft launch during our Indigenous Peoples Day event, IPD versus Empire, on October 12th, so a couple of weeks ago. But we'll be doing the hard launch on November 1st. So please be looking out for that hard launch that Justine and Nick will be releasing. And if you want to donate to the GoFundMe between now and then, you can actually just go to any of the link trees that are attached to either Red Media or the Red Nation. So that's it for announcements. I'm going to pass it to you, Elena, to introduce yourself. And then we have a wonderful guest. We don't often have guests on Red Power Hour, so we're really excited. It took a really long time to get this organized for whatever reason, but it's finally here. It's finally happening. So Elena, I'll pass it to you. And then Liza, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. This is Elena Ortiz calling in from Ogapoge, otherwise known as Santa Fe. And I'm super excited about today because you all have probably heard Melanie and I roast just about everybody from Kevin Costner to Taylor Sheridan, everybody in between. But it's going to be wonderful to have a guest on who can join in that fire. So thanks, Liza.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited for our conversation. My name is Liza Black. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. I'm a racial justice fellow at Harvard University this year, and I'm an associate professor of history and Native American and Indigenous studies at Indiana University.
Awesome. So what we're going to do today, we're going to do the thing that we've been promising to do for like maybe a year and a half on RPH. We're actually going to do, I've been thinking about it as the roast of Taylor Sheridan, but usually, where is it on like Comedy Central where they do the roasts of people or wherever that is? Those are usually done like lovingly, and that's not going to happen today. There's no love. There's no love in this roast. Taylor Sheridan, where people are kind of like joking about like how much they hate somebody. Like I don't think that's going to happen here today amongst the three of us. So maybe roast isn't the correct term. But yeah, we're going to really get into critiquing his work. Liza has written about, Liza, actually, you are kind of an expert on the history of like Native Americans and film and television. I'm not putting you on the spot at all, but you're the perfect person to come on and to talk about this. And so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. And I think just to start off, if folks don't know, you can see actually an op-ed that Liza wrote for High Country News. It came out, I forget, August of 2022, October 2022. And it was specifically, an Indigenous critique of Yellowstone, which is now one of the most popular television series in the history of American TV. I think it's been wrapped up, but there's been like offshoots, and Elaine and I have talked about these 1923 and 1880.
1886, 1889, one of those. Yeah.
I don't know. I just, all I think about is the history of federal Indian policy when I hear those two things, even though that's not what those offshoots or spinoffs, that's what they're called, from Yellowstone are about. But anyway, Liza wrote this great op-ed providing an Indigenous critique of Yellowstone in High Country News in 2022. So I just wanted to hand it over to you, Liza, just to talk a little bit about what is the argument, that you make in that piece, and then we can go from there.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And I just have to say, I'm a huge fan of you both. I love the show. You do such an amazing job. And I can't believe I'm here. I feel very, very lucky. It's quite a privilege to be here with you. So yeah, I literally got paid to watch Yellowstone, and it's funny because I kept telling people I'm not watching it unless I get paid to watch it. And then High Country News reached out and they're like, "We want to pay you to do this piece," and I was like, "I'm literally getting paid to watch Yellowstone. These are the only conditions under which I would do this." Because what a chore. So I watched what was available on of the Yellowstone show up until that time, and I wrote this piece. I do have to say that it was a little more incisive. The original piece was a bit more incisive, and then the editor took some things out and added some things. So there's some things we could get into today that got taken out. So I'm doing a lot. I feel like I'm doing a lot of things in the piece. One is, and I'm so glad that you see it, that I'm trying to critique Costner and Sheridan, that I'm trying to say something about their biographies and about them as, influencing Hollywood and the damage that they are doing to representation in Hollywood. And then I'm also kind of unpacking Native representation in the show, right, in terms of these Native characters, but also kind of the narrative structure and what the narrative structure is saying about Native people. And then I don't think this made it into the final cut, but I was also really interested in the Native actors working on the show, playing Native characters and kind of breaking that down. Again, the original piece is pretty different from the final piece. I was really interested in, like, Adam Beach was proposing a boycott of the film because of the actor who claims to be Cherokee, who is not Cherokee, who played like the damaged daughter-in-law of Kevin Costner, who easily got the job at University of Montana in Native Studies. Remember that? I can't wait. I just cannot wait to tear this apart with you. I just can't wait. So yeah, I was doing a lot of things. I was like trying to take, critique Costner and Sheridan. I was trying to like unpack the deeper meanings of the narrative structure. I was trying to unpack the Native characters and how they kind of fit into that narrative structure, and then think about the position that Native actors are in when they get hired. They get these jobs, or agents get them these jobs, and they have to make these tough decisions about, do I want to participate in this project? Do I want to embody this character? And what does it mean to embody that? And what does it do to their career when they do that? But ultimately, I'm saying, like, I hate this show. Like ultimately, I'm like, this show sucks, and you all suck for loving it.
Yeah,
If it's the most popular show ever, then there's an awful lot of people who suck, and I absolutely agree with you. I've watched all of them, mostly for the podcast, and just, I don't know, it's like watching a train wreck. And I just, as a sort of semiotician, someone who really likes to look at where popular culture is going with Native images, they've all been interesting and disgusting at the same time. And I'm seeing now ads for the final season of Yellowstone on TV, and it just occurred to me last night that, of course, the final season is debuting during Native American or Indigenous Peoples Month, and then that other one, 1923, the latest in the series, of course, has a segment of it, or a storyline that's all about boarding school. The young woman and it's all trauma porn. I mean, it's worse than porn. And I know you have a lot to say, and we've said a lot also about Sheridan's treatment and Costner's treatment of women, Native women, but women in general in all of their shows and movies. And that one in particular is really egregious with the violence and with the trauma, and so I'd love to hear your take on that also, and in particular as also in the news either follows popular culture or vice versa, and we just had Biden apologizing, first president to apologize for boarding school. And immediately, of course, all Native activists and leaders, academics, as well as grassroots leadership, apologies, just an apology. You have to back it up with real action. And so it's interesting that the boarding school storyline in that is sort of it started when Deb Haaland started the project about boarding schools. What are they going to do with it now?
Oh yeah, just so much. So very much to say. So, I only watched part of 1886 when we recorded a podcast on it. I refuse to watch Yellowstone unless I absolutely have to. I've watched other things that Taylor Sheridan has written and directed and produced. So I watched something called Lioness, which is on Paramount Plus, um, which is not part of like the Yellowstone. What do they call those? The Yellowstone family, or what's that word that they use in film and television?
Franchise.
Franchise. It's not part of the Yellowstone franchise. There really isn't much about Native people in that. But Lioness actually reminds me a lot of Sicario, which he also wrote. And we talked a bit about Sicario in relationship to 1886 when we were recording that podcast. So I've watched Wind River. I finally watched Wind River earlier this year because I also refused to watch that for a really long time. So I can definitely comment on the way that in like Sheridan's imagination, what is like the narrative role that Native women play, and it is very much like Native women who are in distress. It's kind of like a damsel in distress, but then refracted through the creepy MMIW lens, because I think he thinks of himself perhaps as like a friend of Native people or something. And so he's obviously very obsessed with Native people because, minus the ones that I just talked about, like Sicario or Lioness or like some of these other things that he's done in television, he's like very, very interested in telling the story of Indians, but the way that Native women and even white women, right, figure into his work, it's there's a lot of violence that happens to women in his writing and in the worlds that he creates, and they don't even. It's not even necessarily damsel in distress. They just endure a lot of violence. They're not even necessarily rescued the way that they would be like when we were talking about Last of the Mohicans last time in this like captivity narrative. It's not even necessarily a captivity narrative. It's just like Taylor Sheridan's weird version of what frontier violence, I guess, looked like when it came to women. And it's very gratuitous, I would say. It's very gratuitous. And so the choice, right, to cast a young Native actress who is supposed to be playing a Native woman, but who is in fact not, right, is not Indigenous, if that's what you were referencing earlier, Liza, that also seems par for the course given his really terrible politics around Native feminism, or just like his, I don't know, him giving even the remotest shit about like, what Native women might actually have to say about these stories that he's telling or about these actual histories. And I'll just say one more thing. I mentioned this earlier. Yellowstone takes place in a contemporary moment, right? It's supposed to be taking place in like the here and now. But when I think of the two spin-offs from Yellowstone, 1886 and 1923, I think about two things, two pivotal moments in the genocidal history of federal Indian policy. I think about allotment. I think about the General Allotment Act, and that the liquidation was oh gosh, how many acres were liquidated during the General Allotment Act? Indigenous land. It's the largest liquidation or theft of land in world history in the 1880s. This is happening in the 1880s when this show is taking place. And then in 1923 is the height of like the most brutal form of assimilation policy for Native people in the United States. So I guess he talks about boarding schools or whatever in 1920, the show 1923. And of course, that is happening at that time. Carlisle is founded in between allotment, kind of between 1886 and 1923. But most of those really horrific stories about the brutality of boarding schools come out of this particular era of the history of boarding schools. And of course, there are other types of assimilation policies that are just completely decimating Native people and Native nations at this time. And so there's this like subtext of genocide, right, and settler colonialism through all of his work. I would say, I would argue, even the work that's not specifically about like would be considered a Western or a neo-Western, or have Indians in it, but it's never, it's never a, it's never approached consciously in any of his shows. There's no even like moral kind of standing. There aren't lines that any of the characters say about this history of genocide or settler colonialism. It seems very much just part, it's not even a settler unconscious, I would say. It just feels such straightforward settler attitude about American history, and what it means to be American, and that is why I hate it so much. And the reason why Yellowstone, and I'll ask you this question because I have my own thoughts about this. Maybe I'll kick it to you, Liza. Why do you think Yellowstone is such a popular show? Like one of the most popular shows in the history of television. I mean, I have an inkling as to why.
I would love to know what you all think about what makes Yellowstone so popular. I mean, I said in the piece, and I kind of still stand by this. I think one aspect that we can all agree, even the three of us, Montana is pretty. Montana is really pretty. It is hard to take a bad picture of Montana. I mean, just about anybody could point any type of camera in any direction. It's going to look pretty good. So there's that. There's that. Montana is like beautiful. I mean, there's a lot of places in the US that are beautiful, right? And so Montana is beautiful, but I don't think that's why. I don't think that's all that's going on there. I mean, I called my piece "We Don't Share Land Here," and you were speaking about values, and I felt, in terms of choosing that particular quote that Kevin Costner utters when there's these Chinese tourists on his land, as they've stepped off this tourist bus, I feel that kind of captures the narrative kind of essence of the entire show. And it's almost like the past doesn't matter, because in this present, you just have natives and you have whites. And they have no values because, in a sense, they have the same values. They all just have land and they all want to keep their land. And that's not, the show sort of purports that that's not a value, that that's just human nature. And you don't need to explain the past. So I was really shocked when they came out with 1886, because I was like, the past really doesn't matter to this show. So in terms of why it's so popular, I think that the scenery is beautiful. I think there is like decent character development. But again, I do not think this is why most people like it. I mean, I'm getting closer to why actually most people like it. And I don't think most people would say this is why they like it. I think they would say Montana is beautiful. The scenery is beautiful. There's good character development. I think that there's a lot going on here with white supremacy and hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity. It's really a show about strong white men and their competition with each other. Yes, Native people are there. I don't feel that Native people are kind of essential to this story. I feel it's a story about this this wealthy, very, very wealthy white patriarch who's a strong man. And I think white American men really identify with that. They want to be that. And that has nothing to do with the beauty of Montana. And that has nothing to do with good writing or character development. That almost doesn't even need dialogue. That's like a look. It's something that's evoked. Right. And they love seeing these white guys square off with each other. And it's almost like the fact that these powerful white guys on set have beef with each other and have physical fights with each other. It's almost like this makes them that much more attractive, I think, to white men today. Like Sheridan has had fights with the actor who plays Rip. He's had physical fights with the actor who plays Rip. The guy with the big thick mustache, Sam Houston. Like, remember during the pandemic, he was like refusing to go into the award ceremonies because he's like, I'm not wearing a mask. I mean, white dudes love that shit. They eat that shit up. They're like, that's my guy. That's a real man. But what do you all think?
I mean, I'm on board with that for sure. I mean, just look at who they cast, and Kevin Costner's bad enough, of course, because of his historic roles in Hollywood. But then, when they do 1886, they cast, and I don't follow country music, but the country music guy was a Faith Hill's husband. I don't know.
Tim
The
McGraw.
patriarch.
Tim McGraw.
Tim McGraw. So they cast this, country music star with his lovely country music wife as the patriarch in that, and then you get the third installment in the franchise, and who is the male protagonist in that? It's Indiana Jones. It's Han Solo, right? So these characters are these male masculine characters are perfectly chosen to represent that. I mean, who wouldn't like to see Indiana Jones in a cowboy hat on a farm or a ranch or whatever? And they also represent land, and actually Harrison Ford himself lives in Montana and owns a huge chunk of land in Montana. And then you think of country music stars, you think of land, you think of these people as representing what the American dream was at the time of Manifest Destiny, which is to have a chunk of land that we don't share, and we're gonna fight for it. And so absolutely, I mean, I am on board with that assessment. And they all also treat women the same way. As the women could be strong characters. And you have Beth in Yellowstone, who is pretty much a female version of her father. She's mean, she's nasty, she swears, she drinks. Um, and and then you have, I think you mentioned this in your piece too, like you flipped the forced sterilization narrative, and it became Beth, whereas that was an anomaly that is used as a narrative device in that show, when actually in reality we know the truth is that Native women across the board were sterilized by the Indian Health Service all the way up until the 1970s. And so you have um, this use of narrative devices that most times don't apply to the people who actually experience them. And in 1886, which I guess, no, Melanie, we talked about this, so you watched this. I think about this with the woman whose name I can't remember that was in that show, the blonde, who she went native. So she did exactly what Kevin Costner did in Dances with Wolves. She went native. She had a relationship with a native guy, and so she had to die because she went native and because she was a woman. If it had been a man, she might not have. But I think about that a lot. She was pierced by an arrow, shot by a bad Indian. So you have that. What does it mean to be pierced by an arrow? And then, as a blonde woman who has been lovers with a native man, of course she has to die. So that's also the undercurrent of a lot of these narratives, is the women, if they show any inkling or any tendency towards the strength of the men, they have to die. And with Beth in Yellowstone, she didn't die, but she was sterilized. She was made less of a woman. And I have a real problem. Well, yeah, I just hate Taylor Sheridan and Kevin Costner. And I think if I saw them, it would be really hard to not just kick them in the shin or punch them in the stomach. Like, what are your feelings about women in real life that you have to treat women like this, or that you portray women like this? They either have to die, suffer extreme trauma, or be punished. And Melanie, you said that at the very beginning of the podcast, like they have to be punished. They have to be, victims of extreme violence. And that's the way the men show their strength.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that the reason why people love this show so much is because it's really just about, first, about white settler ontology, first of all, but especially about white settler masculinity. Um, right, white settler masculinity is reproduced and kind of reforged through violence against the land, violence against women, violence against each other. It's just violence. White settler masculinity is just violence. That's really what the shows tell you, because that's also true. I think if you understand how settler colonialism operates in relationship to heteropatriarchy, and and also, that white settler masculinity, it has to be the competition you're talking about, Liza. It has to be forged through possession as well. There's this possessive aspect that is very essential to white settler masculinity: possessing women, possessing land, possessing power, possessing wealth. Because in a settler society, wealth comes from the land, like land ownership and the land tenure systems that come out of something like the General Allotment Act, where tens of millions of acres are liquidated from indigenous nations, right? And then those parcels are divvied up between private landowners. I'm not sure how many of that actually went into eminent domain or public land or state land. Most of it went into homesteads for private property owners. And we all know that if you own property, especially if you own large tracts of property, like ranchers, cowboys, right? The Kevin Costners and the Harrison Fords, and Taylor Sheridan himself owns it's like a 600-acre ranch or something in Western Texas. That the more land you have, it usually means that you have more wealth and power, in at least in the United States and in settler societies in general. And so, right, that white settler masculinity is forged through um, the really greedy possession of land. And of course, the phrase, we don't share land with anyone. Is that what the phrase is? We don't share land here. Okay, that literally could just be, if you had like, America, we don't share land here. That could be like the tagline for America as a country. America, we don't share land here. And it's like, yeah, no shit. No shit, settler. It's also like, man, you didn't even, this wasn't even your land. Where did that land come from? How did you acquire that land that used to be part of a different land tenure system, that was stewarded by indigenous nations before the advent of your ass and your ass coming here and this country being founded? And it had to be transformed into something called private property so that you could own it and exploit it and extract from it, and build all of this wealth and like this power that you see yourself having as a white settler dude here in the US. So now that you can say in 2024, we don't share land here. But yeah, that's what I think. I think it fulfills like that settler fantasy. I think it fulfills a settler fantasy. I'm sure it's very popular mostly with white Americans. I would imagine that Yellowstone, and probably the spin-offs from it, are as well. Because it really, again, it shores up that white settler fantasy in a moment, in a historic moment, when that fantasy is being obliterated because of what's happening, Palestinian resistance. Um, I think the major uprisings that have happened in the United States over the past handful of years against anti-Blackness, thinking back to Standing Rock around treaty rights, right? The movements and the mobilization that Indigenous people, especially women, have been leading around mitigating climate change. The Land Back movement has been seen, especially now, given the decolonization efforts the Palestinians are undertaking in their homelands. Land back and even the term settler colonialism are now being criminalized. Even just the discourse of those two things in the United States, and seen as incredibly threatening, right? And so, just Indigenous presence of a kind where there might be a competing claim to land, or just like a competing understanding of history, or like an alternative future, Like that is probably seen as very threatening. And you definitely don't see any of that in Taylor Sheridan's shows because he's not interested in that. I think he's just trying, because I think he is the person that he talks about and he writes in all of his shows. I think he is that toxic white settler patriarch. Because I watched some videos of him. I didn't know what he looked like and how he sounded. And I was like, oh, this dude is like a self-made cowboy. Like this who likes to be like rough and tumble. He likes to brawl with people. He like breaks horses and stuff on his big ass ranch in Texas. Like he is the person that he writes in all of these films and TV shows. And so wah, wah. What we do we need more content that's just about like white dudes talking about themselves? And then like native people are just these props around them so that they can continue to glorify their bullshit. Like that's the entire history of American cinema. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but yeah, I 100% agree with what both of you just said, and I don't know. I really appreciate those perspectives.
Yeah, if we could, I was cracking up. I just kept myself on mute so that the sound people, when they edit this, aren't like, "Oh my God, what a mess." Yeah, I mean, I would. There's so much to still talk about. I don't know if you all want to talk more about the scene with Beth, getting sterilized. I felt that was so essential to understanding the show, even though it's just one part of one episode. I think it is essential because I think Beth is kind of essential to the show. Everyone's essential, but Beth is the daughter of the patriarch who is played by Kevin Costner. Beth Dutton is her name. And like Elena said, she's like a man in woman form. She sort of acts exactly like the men. But what's so kind of fascinating to me, in addition to what Elena mentioned about the sterilization of Beth, is that the sterilization is introduced in season 3, episode 5. So you're pretty far in with getting to know these characters. There's been lots of plot lines already established by the time you finally find out about Beth's sterilization. And this is critical to Beth's entire character and to a really important storyline, which is, why does Beth have this difficult relationship with Rip? That's her love interest. And Rip is a really important character on the show and a person who's gotten into physical altercations with Taylor Sheridan, apparently, on set, like when they're not filming, and they have a lawsuit against each other. So Beth is totally in love with Rip, but it's like she has this hot and cold relationship with him where it's like, she shows him her love, and then all of a sudden she, goes completely cold, and like nobody, the viewer doesn't know why. It seems like these two love each other, but she's always, going forward and then coming way back, and you don't know why. Beth also has this really difficult relationship with her brother, right? So there's 3 children, I think, of the patriarch, and her brother Jamie and her hate each other. She gets along with her other brother, but she hates Jamie. And again, you don't know why. So for 3 seasons, you don't know why she loves Rip, but she's not with Rip. And you don't know why she absolutely despises her brother Jamie, but she likes her other brother. And it's all because of this sterilization. So it's not just that the sterilization is totally wrong. It's that it's essential to the entire storyline of Beth. And so when you finally get to this moment in episode 5, season 3, and you see that Jamie is the one Beth tells that she's pregnant. So she's with Rip when she's a teenager. She gets pregnant. She tells her brother Jamie. Jamie says, "I know what to do." And he takes her to the Indian Health Services clinic where there's no wait. That's another thing. There's no wait. She just rolls right in. Whoop! I'm here. I'm 16. I'm white and I'm pregnant. Help me. And Jamie's like, go sterilize my 16-year-old sister. Like the nurse says, "Oh yeah, we can do that, but we'll have to sterilize her." He's like, "That's all right. Take her in there." So she goes in there and gets this abortion, but gets sterilized and doesn't know it. She's only 16. She's white. She's rich. She's beautiful. But the Indians at the Indian Health Services sterilized her right? And so then she, gets older. She wants to have children. She keeps not getting pregnant. She's having, issues like with her reproductive system, and she finds out like I'm sterilized. It's because of fucking Jamie and the fucking Indians at the fucking Indian Health Services clinic. I'm a rich white woman. This shit shouldn't happen to me. Like, that's wild. Like, that is wild, right? And then she tells Rip, and he's like, I love you, baby. And like, it's okay to those Indians sterilize you, baby. Well, our love will endure no matter what, right? So it's like, it's crazy.
It's crazy on so many levels, and just so many levels. I can't even begin to weave those threads back together again. Yeah. Aside from the very basic fact that the public health service, Indian hospitals will not use public money for abortion. And number one, and number two, they would never, doesn't matter how much money you have, they never would have taken her and done that. Likely, maybe not. But the other thing, of course, is you pointed it out, Liza, there was no wait. Can you imagine?
Was she treated in a courteous manner? Because all those IHS ladies are always really mean too.
She was probably treated in a courteous manner and sent home with something other than ibuprofen. But I don't think for sure. I didn't follow that. It's pretty insane. The other scene, I think, Liza, I'd be interested to hear your take on, is the scene where the daughter-in-law, sister-in-law, the wife, the native wife of the other brother, whose name I can't remember, goes into a store in downtown, wherever the hell they're supposed to be, Montana, and it's a very fancy store, and she gets racially profiled, and she is uncomfortable. She's showing how timid she is. She doesn't belong there. She's very nervous, and they arrest her. And so she calls her sister-in-law, and Beth Dutton comes down like a bat out of hell, and with her blonde and her, $3,000 Lucchese cowboy boots and $4 million jeans and all of that, she comes screaming into the store where she obviously shops and they know her. And she just goes postal in the store and starts throwing shit around. And there's a part of, I think, the audience that was cheering and yay, Beth is, doing some, she's standing up for her sister-in-law. She's standing up for the rights of Native people and all this. And I'm just looking at it and thinking, holy shit, here we have another savior. Like, Native women need a savior, and we need it to be Beth Dutton.
Yeah, her character, there's so much to say about the Native woman who is the daughter-in-law of Kevin Costner's character. There's so much to say about her. I had actually kind of blacked out on that scene. I had forgotten about that. I thought you were going to bring up the scene where she's kind of recovering and feeling stronger, because she's sort of portrayed as timid through the whole show, through all the seasons. She's like, she's this meek, thin, scared, timid Native woman. And there's this horrible scene. In addition to the one you just mentioned, there's another horrible scene where she is feeling really strong about herself, and she's decided that she's going to go to the reservation she's from, and like help somebody. She's on her way to go help somebody, and it's like this powerful moment for her. And then like some Native man just like shoots her out of nowhere and tries to attack her. And that's supposed to represent the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, it's not funny, but it is like wild. Like this is Taylor's vision of it, you know. And then she's moping around for, you know, several more episodes after that with like her arm in a sling and everything. But then she lands a job because of her father-in-law as like the chair of the Native American Studies department at University of Montana. So I'm like, oh, that's how you get a tenure track, a chairship. Oh, noted.
Well, she also works with the tribe and what I guess is the FBI to bring in this predator on
Right.
this person who's been preying on Native women, and
Yes.
she's so scared, and she's just, you know, like frozen with fear, and she does it. You know, she that to me was she gets attacked, then she um then she agrees to join this task force or whatever it is to try to catch this person, and she's so scared and she's so timid, but she rises up, and I'm sure Taylor Sheridan sitting there with his cigar and his beer, you know, on his ranch, you know, after he's done lassoing cows and whatever the shit those motherfuckers do, he's like, she's going to be a strong woman, she's going to rise up and catch this person. And all I saw was these men who were incapable of doing it themselves, even though they knew who it was, bringing in not a tribal policewoman, which they probably have, but this woman who's already been traumatized, who agrees to come in and catch this person. It was just the most bizarre episode, and I don't even know.
Yeah, and I think that she had reclaimed her power though, because she got the job. He got her the job because like so she had started like, you know, going up in front of her classes with her arm in a sling, but like kind of tentatively giving lectures, which like built up her confidence again. And then she also went to physical therapy, and like the hot Native guy was her physical therapist, who ends up being a hot Native guy in 1886 who beds the white woman who dies. I mean, it's so predictable. It's gross.
She goes back to her own people. So she's trying to do the appropriate thing instead of being with the white rich guy that, you know, she should not be with because she's a Native woman. She ends up with the physical therapist, but then she realizes, oh, no, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to leave my family. But yeah, really bizarre sort of set of episodes there with her.
Man, what a bunch of bullshit. I haven't watched this, and just listening to you describe the utter load of bullshit that any of this is. I mean, okay, the inversion of like a white woman getting forcibly sterilized by, I don't know, doctors at IHS is just stupid. I mean, it's like I don't what might go through your mind where you're does Taylor Sheridan not know about that history? Or did he like maybe like Google it? And then he was like, I don't know, maybe we should talk about the white woman getting forcibly sterilized. That'd be cool. That'd be like my neo-Western approach to forced sterilization. But just the inversion of that and how disgusting and insulting that is, I would say, to Native women. And that particular practice and its place within the genocidal policy, the continual genocidal policy that Native people and Native women particularly have to navigate. And then everything else you're describing just is complete nonsense, right? A wealthy white rancher getting a young Native, she's young, right? A young Native woman without a PhD, a position as a chair of a Native American Studies department. Like that's just not, it's just nonsense. There's no other word to describe everything that you're saying except that it's just complete nonsense. And of course, I mean, that makes sense because, again, as you said, Liza, the show it doesn't care about Native people at all. It just kind of reproduces that, you know, typical Western thing where Native folks are just props. But the real story is about the white settler family, and particularly like probably Kevin Costner's character, probably his sons who are going to inherit, you know, all of the wealth and power that he has. But it's also like Kevin Costner plays that character, but everyone knows that it's Kevin Costner. And so It's like it's about the character Dutton, whatever his first name is, but it's also just about Kevin Costner. Like, you don't even have to have a pretend name or a character for this person, because that is actually Kevin Costner's story as well. Because that motherfucker owns a lot of land in western South Dakota, which he bought after he filmed Dances with Wolves. And so it's like, I think I said this when we harangued the new Top Gun movie that came out last year. I said it was like a circle jerk or something like that. It's just like a white masculinity circle jerk. I feel like Yellowstone is the same way, because it's like it's only referencing itself. And right, you get what I'm saying? And so like Kevin Costner playing that character is only referencing Dances with Wolves and Kevin Costner. And then you have just like Taylor Sheridan sprinkled into everything. And so then why are Native people even in the show? Seriously, like other than right? This is what I'm why are Native people in any of his shows? Why does he give a shit about Native people? Because he obviously doesn't know anything. He doesn't care about Native people, and they're only props. And the only thing I can think of is because he really loves Westerns, and he's really, really invested, even if it might be unconsciously, in reproducing like that settler narrative, like what you were saying, Elena, of manifest destiny, and the we don't share land with anyone here kind of notion. Because otherwise, like, what? Why are Native people even? I wish he would fucking stop. Actually, just writing Native characters. Now he's going to produce an entire biopic about a very famous Native person, and I'm like, why? Yeah, the Quanah Parker, right? Anyway, I'm going to
Yeah,
stop
Empire
talking.
of the Summer Sun. He bought the rights to that, and it's horrific. But absolutely, like, and also the native characters we talked about the daughter-in-law, whose name none of us can remember, who's actually not a native actress, although there are so many really amazing native actors. They found someone who wasn't. Um, but the other native actors in it, or the other characters in it, I think are designed to justify and elevate Costner's status, because as you watch the show, and you're never quite sure. The chairman of the tribe wants to get his focus is to get land back from what Costner has. That some of that land, um, you know, all of that land actually belongs to the tribe, but they also want to get some of the land back. They want it to provide economic development for the tribe. So they're in talks with the evil white people, because of course the Duttons are not evil, to start this big resort property with ski lifts, and all of the good white people who don't want to share their land with anyone don't want that, because it's going to bring in, other white people. There's going to be settlers on the settlers. And, like, God forbid we settle on settled land, because then they would know how indigenous people feel. But there's this whole, I don't even remember what season it was, where the Duttons are fighting that, because they're talking about how horrible it's going to be if the ski resort gets built, and the native people are trying to push it through, and then they don't. Then they decide they don't want to push it through, and there's all of this going on. But the native characters are just there to justify what the Duttons are doing, and they're not. Any of them are really good or bad. They just seem sort of innocuous and ambiguous, and not their characterization is not well done. And they're just, I think, like Melanie said, they're just props to be moved around. And I don't ever get a feeling that they are there other than set dressing. um and it's interesting because, Liza, you talked about the native actors, and I'm interested, like, on your take, because a few months ago, it was a while ago, when Taylor Sheridan acquired the rights to Empire of the Summer Sun, about Quanah Parker, and I was gagging. I thought that was just the most awful thing I had heard. And there were other Native people who took to social media and, said, this is horrible. This, we don't want to see our story told by Taylor Sheridan. And then there are members of the cast, the Indigenous members of the Yellowstone franchise, who came out and said, "Oh, I can't think of anyone better." And they were men. I can't think of anyone better to produce this film. And that's a whole other level that we have also talked about on Red Power Hour, which is, um, a lot of Native men, particularly those in positions of power, will gravitate towards power. And that's fucked up.
Yeah, it is. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking someone will take that job. Someone will take that job, and now we're talking about capitalism. We're talking about racial capitalism. And this was one thing I was trying to get at in my first book about Native people in films, as I was trying to think about, it's not just about the representation. These people are working in jobs, representing themselves, and they have super difficult choices that they're making. And desperate people will do desperate things. Desperate people will do things that are, demoralizing and demeaning because they're desperate. And it's so sad that even if, Native actors wanted to organize a boycott, I fear that somebody would be willing to work for Taylor Sheridan. I mean, people were willing to do it for Yellowstone, even though Adam Beach was like, we've got to stay away from this project. It worked. There's a lot of people you would expect to see in Yellowstone, Native actors you would expect to see in Yellowstone who are not in Yellowstone. But he managed to find a few people. And like you said, they're defending the new projects because that's their paycheck. Oh, I've made you sad. I'm sorry. No, we're not laughing. It's not funny. That's not funny.
It's not funny, but it's true. And I understand people need to work. This is their chosen profession. They're really good at it. Even and I think Melanie and I have done a lot of Red Power Hour episodes on TV shows and films, and we have great reverence for the OGs, and Graham Greene and Tanju Cardinal, and all of the OGs who have been around for so long and who represent themselves, but represent native, actual Native peoples in the cinema, and they've had to do some films that were pretty horrific. I think the shift might be, as Melanie was talking about, the shift, in the political situations also feeds into what Hollywood holds up its mirror to. And Standing Rock and Land Back and the more representation we see all across the country by Native activist groups and even Deb Haaland. And now I think Hollywood is running scared. You have people who are doing Native shows. You have Reservation Dogs. You have things that are being written, directed, produced, acted by Native people. And I think Hollywood is feeling like they need to catch up now, and they need to cast Native actors, but they have no clue the stories that they're taking on. And I don't know. I read Empire of the Summer Sun a long time ago, but I mean, Quanah Parker is an important figure in Native history. He's also a figure that very few people in this country know anything about. And I just cringe and get sick to my stomach when I think about what Taylor Sheridan is going to do to that character. And I think Adam Beach is right. And I think the people who can stand up and say, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it unless we have creative control. And we want to tell the stories. We want the narratives to be ours. So I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we've said this before because we do a lot of these film and TV reviews on Red Power Hour, that when we were maybe when Res Dogs came out 3, 4 years ago, the first season, there was this feeling, I think from about, like, 2019, because remember when Time Magazine announced 2019 was, like, the year of the Indigenous woman? Do you remember this bullshit? Yeah. And then, like, Joe Biden was elected in 2020, and Deb Haaland becomes, like, the first Native person, Native woman, in charge of the Department of the Interior, all of this stuff. There's, like, national attention to MMIW, um, there's now a national conversation about the history and legacy of boarding schools. So there's this notion that somehow Native people have entered the mainstream. I think in a way, there's like a renaissance. I don't think it's the first time that that's happened, but we have been experiencing it now for the last handful of years. And I think but, as that is happening, that kind of rise in that trajectory of Native creatives, I would say, getting more airtime, just basically more airtime, or just Native people and Native history and issues, Native perspectives, just getting more airtime within kind of like mainstream American media spaces. You also have like the coeval rise of Taylor Sheridan during this period. And so what does it mean if there's this renaissance of more like native controlled narratives, like what you were saying, Elena, having more creative control, having more like representation? Essentially, there's just like more native people and there's more native stuff, I would say, out in the public than there has been, I think, in a long time because of this renaissance. But the way that it is like reconsumed and repackaged within the Western narrative, that Western, right, which again is just about manifest destiny, it's just about settler colonialism, is so fucking strong that even as Native people are making little, like having little footholds, just like these. This is my little foothold, the little footholds in film and television. Taylor Sheridan is literally dominating the entire universe of and bringing back the Western in just like the most intense way, I would say. And so I don't know. I don't. I'm just thinking out loud about this. I don't have any like strong critique or whatever. But our conversation is making me think about these two kind of parallel trajectories, and it doesn't give me. I guess what it means is that it doesn't give me much hope, I think, for where the Native Renaissance in media is going if there is absolutely no consciousness or like political pushback against like Taylor Sheridan and his rise to power and his rise to fame. Because what it means is it's still, at the end of the day, it's still just the same old racist bullshit in media. And Native people will still only have these shitty options, to act in something like a dumb movie made by Martin Scorsese, for example, or a dumb movie made by, Taylor Sheridan, like these white guys. And so yeah, I don't really know what the future is because we've been tracking it. We have been actively tracking it. Like we comment, we're going to do an episode on Resball. I haven't watched Resball yet, right? We're going to do more episodes actively tracking this Native Renaissance. But yeah, this conversation about Taylor Sheridan is making me really think deeply, and I think I'm a bit more pessimistic now, thinking about where that Native Renaissance is going to go in terms of any like real change of the relationship between Native people and American pop culture, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, I would like to tell you something that might make you even less hopeful. And something that probably neither of you knew. So I'm writing a book on missing and murdered Indigenous women. It includes 6 case studies, and one of the case studies is Savannah Greywind. Mona Gable, a journalist, just came out, or maybe a year ago, came out with a book on Savannah Greywind, thorough, long. Imagine my surprise. Yes, 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 Elena, yes, yes. Imagine my surprise when I am reading Searching for Savannah by Mona Gable, and I get to chapter 14. And whose name do I see? Taylor Sheridan. What is Taylor Sheridan doing in this book? Taylor Sheridan, I am not making this up, this is a fact, was the keynote speaker in June 2018 at the Women Are Sacred conference in New Mexico.
Who the fuck invited him? What the what?
Now, Mona was there. Mona writes about this. May I read you an excerpt of what he shared from the stage? Okay. He said, quote, "Why is this white man here telling our story?" Sheridan had spent time in his 20s on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota on a spiritual quest. Quote, "They taught me songs and they taught me their history," end quote, he said. Quote, "I made friends that are friends today. I got to witness something you don't if you haven't spent real time on a reservation. I witnessed poverty and racism at a level I've never seen." Then he started to talk about the army and the slaughtering of tribes to gain territory. Quote, "As you know, Western expansion in the 19th century hit a roadblock when it hit the plains. If they could draw out the warriors, they could attack the women and children, which is exactly what they did." And then he ended by saying the poverty and violence in Indian country now weren't accidental. They were a, quote, "systematic system of control," end quote. His remarks drew applause. So I hesitated to bring that up, but I did want to share that with you, right? Because that's moments before 2019, the year of the Indigenous woman. And I think that this is a really slippery slope. You know, I think where you were going, Melanie, is like maybe more representation is not better necessarily. More is not necessarily better, you know, and here's one reason why. Because these famous people who have a lot of access, who have a lot of privilege, who have a lot of wealth, and who get an immense amount of approval from a very large public and have powerful agents and powerful PR agencies, they can get speaking engagements like this, where they're telling Native women what to think about being a Native woman.
Well, we weren't invited, or we would have told him something. In fact, we would have really told him something. I don't even know if it had been with words, but we would have made our opinions known. I can't even believe that. But you're right. You're right. You're both right. You know, it's the more popular Native subject stories become, the more you have people like Taylor Sheridan, Kevin Costner coming in and reinventing themselves, using their history with Native people. And Costner did it in '92 with Dances with Wolves. And, you know, certainly John Wayne made his living doing it. And John Ford and Tony Hillerman, another person that we have talked about, you know, capitalizing on Native people. So, yeah, it's too bad because, you know, the stories that we have far more stories than will ever be told. And they're far more interesting than what is told. And now it makes me afraid to even think about them being told because, yeah.
Man, so many things. The thought that I had right before I spoke was how tragic that we have so few avenues as Native people and Native women for our stories to be told and to be shared, that we would have that Taylor Sheridan and Wind River becomes some sort of like icon of the movement to stop MMIW, that we would even give a shit what this man has to say about what it is like to be a Native woman in America, right? And so I don't think it's about representation, you know, kind of spitballing off of what you said, Liza. It's true that you're right. That is where I was going. More representation isn't good. And I think at this point, we're a handful of years into this Native Renaissance, as I've been calling it. I think we're really seeing the limits of the politics of representation. That's what it is. And and so and there's the whole discourse in the academy about, how the politics of representation doesn't really translate into real material change. And that's certainly important to draw from. But I think it's more that, like, what we're doing here, like with creating this podcast and having Red Power Hour be like an unapologetic space for like Native women freestyle, right? And that's kind of why we have this vibe here, and creating Red Media, the organization that does all the production for the podcast, creating an imprint where we're able to elevate the work of just Native people, Native people who aren't academics necessarily, often who come from movements or would never ever have a venue to share like their incredible knowledge about history and about politics and theory, um, and about the future of our people. And that, I think creating more things like this actually might be the right path to invest our energy in, instead of like, getting a paycheck playing some demoralizing and demeaning character in some fucked up Taylor Sheridan movie. And it's not to I'm actually not criticizing native actors or native folks in Hollywood who are doing that necessarily. I think most of them are actually working class or are barely able to make their ends meet with the gigs that they do get as writers or as producers or as actors. That's not all of them. Some of them are real shit asses. Some of them are real hang around the fort kind of motherfuckers. I'm just gonna be real here. And I think we all know who those people are. And so I'm not talking about them, but I'm just talking about like Native people trying to make it in the industry. I know a lot of those people and I have a lot of respect for them. So I'm not necessarily, shitting on them or saying that, but like, why can't we just put more energy into creating our own spaces for sharing these kinds of stories in the way that they are supposed to be shared, with respect, right? And with humility, um, and building that power. Because I don't want to cede more power, like narrative power, to fucking Taylor Sheridan and Kevin Costner. That's why would we keep doing that? We've had the wind at our back with this kind of like uptick in our visibility in like mainstream spaces in the US, like with all of that power that we've built, like why would you just give that away? No Native woman I know would give that power away. Let's be fucking real. Like because that's literally what rape is. It's literally about taking someone's power. That's the whole purpose. It's about diminishing that power that Native women actually hold. Native women are sacred, the name of that conference. And so I don't know, again, I'm on another soapbox. I also wanted to say one other thing unrelated to that. But this whole fucking narrative of I spent time on Pine Ridge, and let me tell you, like it was so violent and there was so much poverty, but I went into a sweat lodge with a medicine man and like, like this was part of my narrative. Okay, Tim Walls. Okay, Taylor Sheridan. Cool. I guess Taylor Sheridan can run for vice president now because that's like his credentials, like
And he probably will.
anyway, I'm so sick. That narrative, enough with that fucking narrative. That is as bad as like my great grandmother was a Cherokee princess bullshit. Enough with like your gross, weird voyeurism on Pine Ridge. Like, and it's always Pine Ridge, always Pine Ridge. Like, enough. Like, that's canceled. That shit is canceled. I'm so sick of that narrative. Anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, like, will the family? I mean, I would like to see these people at Pine Ridge like verify this information. I mean, for all we know, he is making this shit completely up. Like, okay, what are their names? What are the names of these people? Because I'm like, really, you just sort of like parked and started talking to people? Like, that's crazy.
And they invited you in to their house and
Yeah.
fed you and invited you to ceremony?
Yeah. I mean, talk about the white imagination. I mean, I don't even necessarily believe these stories. I mean, yes, it is such a trope. It's always the same story. But I'm also like, did it even occur? Like in the three-dimensional realm, in the space-time continuum in which we exist, in which we know and understand, not in an altered state.
Maybe he got really yoded. Maybe he took a bunch of peyote and went on a trip. Because we need to do a whole ass podcast on, like, the rise of psychedelics within fit and therapy as well. Because that shit is fucked up, and it's also extremely it's like settler at anyway, Taylor Sheridan sounds like he was on a yacht trip, and then he was just like, "Yes, I did go to Pine Ridge. Yes, I did know." Probably just makes up a bunch of names that he thinks the Indians are named, like, after, like,
Yeah,
birds and
have
shit.
the exact same experience that everybody else has. And he happened to draw the exact same conclusions that everybody else does on these imaginary trips to Pine Ridge.
It's fucking like, enough. This we again, it's just about playing Indian, right? It's just these, like, adoption fantasies. Every white anthropologist's wet dream, right, was to be adopted by a native family, and then they write these memoirs about it, and the captivity narrative is almost also all kind of about it being adopted, and it's all just about a proximity to indigeneity that then justifies your so-called permanence on stolen land that isn't yours. You know, if you can claim to be indigenous in some way, shape, or form, or having a relationship with indigenous people, then you can just be like, "Oh yeah, I'm really close to the land," you know? Like, I'm not one of those bad settlers. I'm a good settler. There's good Indians and bad Indians, and there's good settlers and bad settlers. And so in their minds, settlers are like, "I'm a good settler." I was adopted by an Indian.
The future is this podcast. People, I mean, I'm not trying to just gas you up. People have so much respect for Red Nation. They have so much respect for this podcast. So many people listen to this. This is a really meaningful what you're doing. And you're quite right that this is where our energy needs to go because we have amazing stories. We have amazing people. We don't need these Taylor Sheridans. We don't need these Kevin Costners. Like we have a wealth of knowledge, of expertise, of theory, of story, of experience, and you all are doing amazing work that people really appreciate, and it's only growing. I just feel like your audience is always growing, and this is what matters.
Well, thanks for saying that, Liza. Yeah, I mean, we go through, and we do, like, this podcast is no different. We go through the ups and downs, and sometimes we're laughing hysterically, and sometimes, you know, like, we get to the end of the podcast and we have to, like, physically shift positions to think of something hopeful, because um, hope is revolutionary. And I think Melanie and I had a conversation about stories and women last year sometime, and feeling like our responsibility as Native women is to keep telling the stories, and that we are tasked, all of us as Native women, with keeping the stories going. And that's our responsibility to our communities. That's our responsibility to Indigenous people as a whole, and to each other, is to just keep the stories going. And, we can laugh about it, but we're still fighting the same battles that our ancestors fought against these white men in different ways. And the fighting hasn't gotten any easier. It's just shifted mediums, or it's shifted um, places, but it's the same fight. And to have a man like Taylor Sheridan talking to a group of women about missing and murdered Indigenous relatives is just horrific. And to have him take on the storytelling, it's wrong. It's just so wrong. At bottom, it's just so wrong. And by allowing us to tell the stories, at least we know that the people who are listening to them understand where we're coming from, and understand that this is survival for us. These stories are survival. They're just not to make money. They're about us passing on our knowledge.
Yeah, I think, every time I hop here on the mic for a podcast, or if Red Nation is doing, an event, the person I'm having a conversation with is a Native person, always. And most of pop culture, God, not even pop culture, a lot of the shit that Native people have produced has not been for Native audiences. It's been for the white gaze. It's been for the settler gaze. Let's be real. And again, not trying to like shit talk those tendencies because people gotta make money at the end of the day to make a living. But we're not even remotely interested in that. That's the other element I think that I wanted to bring in here that I didn't say earlier, that we need to be producing and creating spaces and producing media that's by Indigenous people and for Indigenous people, which is what we say in Red Media. Um, and so that's why I do this. That's why we play this game, as our comrade Demetrius says. It's for Native audiences. Um, and I also wanted to say, gosh, I was going to say one more thing. Oh yeah. So I think even though like the tone is like gone down a little bit, just being like, oh, that's fucked up. Taylor Sheridan's all fucked up, uh, and just kind of getting a little sad about that. That anecdote that you shared, Liza. I think, though, to try to get us to a hopeful point here, maybe as we're wrapping up, if that's what we're doing right now, we might go another round. I'm not sure. Uh, is that Taylor Sheridan doesn't matter. I think he's insignificant, and so he thinks he's the bee's knees, right? He thinks he's treated like he has built an empire. He's built a media empire around glorifying white toxic settler masculinity. But from the Native feminist perspective, he is inconsequential to how we tell stories. Yeah, he's unimportant because he doesn't get facts straight. He doesn't care. Uh, he's kind of an idiot, actually. And so I think being able to provincialize his work in that way it's not like a mental exercise to kind of cope with it. I think that's actually the truth because what you were saying, Elena, our stories, fuck man, our stories go back millennia. Like we have the original relationship with this land. We were willing to share it. We were actually willing to share it through treaties. It was settlers who didn't want to share it, who had that attitude. We don't share this land. We don't share here. Um, so I think as long as we continue to create spaces to tell those stories and continue to tell those stories in the right ways that we know how, our tradition of storytelling, not the settler tradition of storytelling, man, that's going to be around here 1,000 years from now. Also, after his dumb asses, in the dustbin of history, because that man thinks he's all powerful, but he ain't. He ain't.
I think that should be the title of today's podcast. It should be Taylor Sheridan Doesn't Matter. That's the title.
Absolutely true. He doesn't matter. And I was thinking as Melanie was talking, like, also, son of a bitch lives in Texas. I mean, I'm sorry, but like, he's already in hell. He just doesn't know it.
Aren't they always losing power because Ted Cruz refuses to have any infrastructure for his citizens?
Yep. Yep. And then when the power grid goes down, he gets on a plane and goes to Cancun. So yeah, Taylor Sheridan's already in hell. He just doesn't know it yet. And that's how stupid he is. He doesn't even know he's in hell. And when the flames start licking around his ankles, man, he's gonna scream like a little settler and run off into the sunset, and that will be all for Taylor Sheridan. Screaming little settlers with their $1,000 cowboy boots on fire, running from
The flames of hell. Oh my goodness. Well, Liza, is there anything else that you wanted to share? You said was that the one tidbit? I like
Yes.
the gossip. Okay.
Yeah, that was it. Yep.
Cool. Well, that was extremely shocking. That led us on a trajectory. We we unraveled a bit, but I think we came back. I just appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope we were able to cover all the things that you wanted to say. This has been an incredible conversation. And Elena, it's always good to see you. I feel like we don't record enough, but
Yeah, we keep promising, but life gets in the way.
well, thanks everyone for listening. Uh, did you want to say something, Liza, before we wrapped up?
Thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor to be here. This was really a delight. And Taylor Sheridan does not matter, but Red Nation Media does.
Oh, that's the perfect ending note. Please consider becoming a patron, joining our Patreon. You can find us anywhere on Patreon. Just look up Red Media. And again, just a reminder, we'll be doing the hard launch of our GoFundMe campaign for Red Media starting on November 1st. So please be on the lookout for that. If you want to donate before that, it is already available through any of the link trees through Red Media or the Red Nation. All right, until next time, everyone. Thanks.